My name is Don, and thank you to Yes to Life for organising this. I'm actually very honoured that they asked me to speak. I know that it's been a little bit time coming, but it finally got there. And today I'd like to talk about, I'd like to talk about quite a few different things. So I hope you don't mind. I'm going to kind of be surfing around a little bit, and hopefully by the end of it will make a little bit of sense in terms of my approach to this subject, and certainly the approach of our clinic to this subject. Before I move any further, obviously this is very important here, right? We don't want to fall foul of the Cancer Act. Very, very important, and I'm notorious for putting my foot in my mouth.
Can I check if this is on?
It should be on. Yep, it's on. So none of this presentation amounts to advice for treatment, right? This is purely my kind of take on the landscape of cancer at the moment, and Chinese medical concepts and Chinese medical theories around this subject. So a little bit about myself. First of all, I am the director of this clinic. AcuMedic has been in existence since 1972. We're the oldest Chinese medical clinic in the UK, possibly Europe. I'm not quite sure, but I think we're there or thereabouts. And we offer Chinese medicine, acupuncture, herbal medicine, tweener massage. We also offer other massage services as well. We've also got a skincare range called Sinensis, which you were all standing around just before. I'm also the director of Mayleaf Tea. Mayleaf is a tea company. We specialize in providing real, true, high-quality tea. And when I say true tea, I mean true tea. We source it direct from farmers, and it's real artisan tea, top-drawer stuff. And I'm also the chairman of the CMIR. The CMIR is the Chinese Medical Institute and Register. And this is an association, professional association for practitioners. We train GPs, we train doctors, we train healthcare professionals in Chinese medicine and acupuncture. We run diploma courses in association with Beijing University in China. So we're all about trying to integrate East and West and try to get doctors and healthcare professionals to learn more about the concepts of Chinese medicine. The CMIR is also involved as a kind of advocacy group. We are dealing a lot with the politics of medicine, of which I'll discuss a little bit today. So that's part of the role that I have there as well. I'm also, sorry, this is not meant to show off. I'm just giving you the whole list so you understand my background. I'm also chairman of the Chinese Medical Council. Chinese Medical Council is a council set up to bring together different Chinese medical associations to speak with one voice and to hopefully move forward and push integrative medicine. And finally, you'll be happy to hear, I'm vice chairman of the World Federation of Chinese Medicine. That's based in Beijing, and specifically for this committee, the Committee for the International Communication of Chinese Medicine, which is a very long-winded way of saying trying to push the language, trying to develop the language of Chinese medicine so that it's more palatable and more understandable to the Western clients. Who I am not. I'm not a Western medical doctor, and I'm not a Chinese medical doctor. We have quite a few Chinese medical doctors working here. We have Western medical doctors working here. I would always defer to them in terms of knowledge, in terms of specifics. So I'm not coming to you from a medical background. I think it's very important that I make that clear. I'm not also a medical researcher officially, although I tend to spend my life in books and reading and understanding and trying to tease out the truth in various different areas of medicine. So what is my role? Well, to give you a little bit about my background, my father was a professor in Chinese medicine. So I've been brought up around Chinese medicine my whole life. I had acupuncture needles stuck in me from day one. And so I've been brought up in this environment of Chinese medicine. And I've been very fortunate in the sense that I have had an upbringing. My mother is from Switzerland, so there's been this real kind of convergence and divergence of East and West. And my whole kind of upbringing has been all about trying to figure out the differences in cultures and how that affects belief. And I think that it's something that is often overlooked and something that people don't really talk about, that people's idea of truth is so ingrained in their culture. It's so ingrained in what they were brought up to believe and what they brought up to think. And in many ways, it's invisible to us all, in the sense that we don't really know how much of that influence has affected our way of thinking. But the more we challenge ourselves, hopefully we start to understand the truth and we start to reveal different aspects of thought and different ways of looking at the world. So my father before me and now me, it's really about bridging East and West and bridging those concepts and trying to make that communication happen and make that that dialogue happen to hopefully bring about new ideas and new thoughts. Oh, sorry. So it's all about trying to bridge those concepts. And one thing that I'm very particularly focused on is trying to break down dogmas. And dogmas is something that is a real kind of bugbear of mine, and something, being involved in the politics of medicine, you see all the time. And I think that we need to kind of expose those dogmas and expose them so that we can hopefully bring ourselves to a more enlightened state. So quickly, definition of science, you all know it, but I just want to make it clear because the concept of science has in many ways been hijacked, and the idea of science has been kind of restricted to a very, very narrow field. But if you actually look at the definition of science, it's a methodology, it's a systematic study. It's basically being curious and constantly trying to question what you think is your own truth, constantly trying to question, things that you don't understand, and question what people claim to be true. And question, seek out evidence from all different areas, in all different ways. Not in a particular defined way, but trying to bring all the evidence together in order to bring about some sort of understanding of the world. And so this is done through observation and experiment. The difference between science and dogma is a dogma is a principle or set of principles laid down by an authority that is considered to be incontrovertibly true. And I think that this is one of the key things that I notice more and more as I involved in medicine and the politics of medicine, is how much dogma is creeping into medicine, or is very much entrenched in medicine. And oftentimes the people that are espousing those dogmas don't actually realize that they're dogmas, because the moment you realize they're a dogma, in a way it kind of breaks the myth, right? Because it's no longer something that you see the structure of, it just seems to be true. You've always been taught that this is true. And this brings me back to the concepts of culture and belief affecting your concept of truth. So we're going to try and break down a few of those today. So let's look at some of the prevailing medical science dogmas. Things are changing, and this is a really good thing, and there's a real movement and there's a real motion towards change, and I think that that's something to be encouraged. And so some of these maybe you will feel are actually changing, but they are, or they at least have been, really prevailing medical science dogmas. The first is the concept of science and materialism, the scientific materialists, as they're often talked about, which is that everything in the world is explained through mechanical, material, or chemical means, and that everything is either material, mechanical, or chemical in nature. Scientists that are studying consciousness are very, very few, right? Consciousness is the big mystery. Consciousness is, the most incredible thing, and yet for many material scientists, it's kind of considered an annoyance or an irrelevance, because you exist in your head. You're basically a machine, in essence, a machine which is your whole concept of life experience is chemical messages in your brain. And that obviously is something that doesn't sit very comfortably with a lot of people, and yet it's really something that's pushed. Material science is something which is dominating science. And if you read books, there's a great book called The Science Delusion by Rupert Sheldrake, which I recommend to everybody, which really tries to break down this concept of material science by actually really questioning everything that you thought was true. The other concept which has been a prevailing dogma in medical science is that we are essentially insular, that we're essentially closed off. Richard Dawkins' famous words, that we are all lumbering robots that are kind of somehow insulated from the world, and that our health is dependent on essentially internal factors in everything that we breathe or take in, but that our environment or the concept of energy or the concept of, relationships, the concept of all of this other expanse of exogenous factors that are around us really needs to be explained purely in the basis of a chemical receptor that's brought in and somehow affecting our body, and that it can't exist in any other way. So the insular state is something that's a really prevailing medical science dogma. Similarly, the idea that body and mind are separate and should be treated separately, which is a key difference between a lot of medical science and a lot of so-called holistic medicines. The idea that that there's no boundary between those two. This is not just something that exists in medical science. It's a perspective issue. It's an issue of the individual considerations, and we'll talk a bit about that in a second. And finally, the big one, evidence. Everyone's talking about evidence. You need to show evidence of X, Y, Z. The unfortunate truth is that, the medical science fraternity have a very, very narrow view of what is considered to be adequate evidence. I debate this with doctors all the time and politicians all the time. But the fact is that, RCTs, in all their glory and for all the good that they have done, which is great, is one piece of a puzzle and is not the whole story of evidence. And interestingly, David Sackett, who was the father of evidence-based medicine, actually predicted very early on in the 90s, I believe, when he was really pushing forward EBM. He himself was saying that he was scared that we would become tyrannized by the concept of external evidence, in other words, RCT trials, and that we weren't actually going to use all of the information that we're given. And hopefully we're starting to move more towards an outcome-based approach to evidence, and an approach which is much more about real-world trials rather than simply randomized control trials. So those are some of the dogmas that I think are pervading in medical science. Deng Xiaoping, the father of modern China, he famously said, it doesn't matter whether the cat is black or white as long as it catches mice. And I have a very similar approach to medicine. A good medicine is a medicine that works. A good medicine is a medicine that achieves outcomes. The approach of integrative medicine, and we are just one small piece of this integrative medicine movement. There are many of you probably sitting here, and many of them out there, is all about this. It's about saying, this is not about dividing lines. This is not about saying this is better than that, or, East is better than West, or, drugs are bad and, natural is good. It's not about that. It's about saying what works and what is going to help our clients without causing them as little side effects and damage as possible. And so my whole remit is medical research should not be dictated by dogmas. It should be open. And it should follow the other sciences in many ways, like modern physics, which is very expansive in their thought, very expansive in the way that they're looking at the world, and not afraid to kind of bring forward really radical ideas and explore them, because that's really where you will start to find much more truth. So, my last little tirade about the politics of medicine, and then we'll move on a little bit from here. But, I do believe that we have a fundamental problem in our medical system, and it's a broken system. And the problem is that the people that fund research, that fund the regulatory authorities, for example, the MHRA is pretty much, funded by the industry. The people that are spending money on lobbying, the people that have the influence to disgrace and shame other scientists, and have such a big influence on the entire educational system, are the same people that have an interest to selectively ignore any treatments that are not profitable to them. And this is just a crazy situation. And again, this is not about saying Big Pharma is bad. It's not about that. It's just saying that the system is set up in a really messed up way. I was trying to think of an analogy, and I actually couldn't think of one because it's so crazy that I don't think it exists in many other walks of life. But I guess it would be something similar to, I don't know, football agents, all of them owning a football club and then basically saying, well, we want you to choose our players. It's like, it shouldn't be that way. It shouldn't be that the people that are basically have the power to choose what medicines and what therapies are researched have such a vested interest in those decisions at the end. And I want to make it clear that, again, the idea that there are some kind of evil people kind of rubbing their hands together is I think, very simplistic. And there's an experiment that was done called the 5 monkeys experiment. Does anybody know this experiment? The 5 monkeys experiment is a really interesting experiment in behavior. So the 5 monkeys experiment is this. You take 5 monkeys, you put them in a room, and then you give them a ladder or some stairs or whatever, and you put bananas at the top, a bunch of bananas. Inevitably, they all go up to get the bananas, right? As soon as they do, you blast them with freezing cold water from a hose. So you really make them shocked, and they run away and they scatter. And they continue to try to get the bananas, but you always give them the hose every time they do. All right, so they become conditioned not to do a certain thing. Then you take a monkey away and you put a fresh monkey in, a new monkey in. And that monkey will see the bananas and start to go up. And the other monkeys will beat that monkey up. The other monkeys will stop that monkey from going up there and getting the bananas because of the fact that they know that they're going to get hosed. And you can slowly take away monkey after monkey until you are in the bizarre situation where you have 5 monkeys that have never been hosed, ever, and yet none of them will go up and touch the bananas. And I think that this is a really interesting kind of concept in the way that people are conditioned, in the way that we're all conditioned. That if you have enough of a stick to bash people, and that punishment filters through a culture. That punishment filters through a thought process, and you become conditioned in a certain way to either do something or not do something. And so I think the 5 monkeys experiment is an interesting one. Famous scientist Jacques Benveniste was somebody who was bashed, and you can see his quote here: "Salem witch hunts will kill science. Science only flourishes in freedom. We must not let fear, blackmail, anonymous accusation, libel and deceit nest in our labs." And I think that there's a lot of scientists, you can reel off a whole list of scientists that have had this treatment, including Nobel award-winning scientists that have had this treatment. When they start to step outside the boundaries of material science, they are punished in some way by the industry. So let's move to Chinese medicine, and let me give you a little run through, and it will be very brief, about the kind of theory of Chinese medicine, or some of the theories of Chinese medicine. So first of all, Chinese medicine is a medicine based on thousands of years of observation and experimentation. And you saw the definition of science before, observation and experimentation. And I would quite happily argue with anybody who wants to say that Chinese medicine is not based on science or not scientific in any way. It's developed over time. Now, that doesn't mean, as many materialist scientists say to me, oh, just because it's old doesn't mean it's true. Of course, accepted. But it means that there's been a lot of information that's been gathered in a very systematic way. And what's happened is that they've developed a system of medicine combining a number of theoretical modalities. And you've probably heard of quite a few of them. You may have heard of Qi, you may have heard of Yin and Yang and 5 elements. There are others, but we're going to just brush the surface here a little bit, okay? So Qi, 5 elements, and Yin and Yang, you've probably all heard about these at some point in passing conversation, or you've seen these things mentioned. So you work on those areas together to bring about healing. Now, as part of my role for the World Federation of Chinese Medicine Societies in the international communication of Chinese medicine, what I am trying to bring about is a change in the language. Because, Chinese medicine has this history, it has all of this knowledge, but it's still being framed in a very old language way. The language that's being used to describe Chinese medical theories, and the language which continues to be taught in Chinese medical universities, is a language that was developed hundreds if not thousands of years ago by people making observations, right? And so what they were doing is looking at observations, seeing patterns that they could recognize, and trying to give those things names. And so the terminology which is used in Chinese medicine can sometimes seem very esoteric, can sometimes seem very kind of a little bit out there, it doesn't have to be that way. And I think that Chinese medicine, just in the same way as Western medicine, has to respond and has to break down any particular dogmas within Chinese medicine and has to develop and modernize. So, I'm a great advocate for Chinese medicine not strictly adhering to ancient interpretations of health. Again, black cat, white cat, it's about what works. It's about trying to figure out what is the right interpretation. The language needs to be changed to avoid confusion and to avoid ridicule as well. You talk about, excess heat, damp rising, pathogenic qi, and all of these things that, you speak to an average person on the street in the West, and they'll kind of look at you with a little bit of a funny kind of quizzical look. So it's about changing the language, and that's obviously a very difficult process when something is so entrenched to try and do that. And there has to be more evidence gathering, and this is something that we're involved with. I know Rob at Alliance for Natural Health is involved in it with us, and all things about gathering outcome data, gathering evidence, because, like it or loathe it, RCTs are here to stay, and we, have to find a way to demonstrate the effectiveness of our medicine rather than just individual anecdotal quotes from patients that were miraculously cured of certain things. It's all about trying to build up big data, and so that's what we're trying to do as well. So, given that, let's go through some of the concepts and just try to briefly touch upon them. Qi is a very commonly spoken about concept, and you'll often, if you see a doctor in Chinese medicine, they'll often refer to it as vital energy or the life force, or all of these different very kind of hard to pin down concepts. But energy being one of the most commonly used one, because energy is a kind of catch-all for lots of different things. But really, when you actually look into the text and you look at you talk to Chinese doctors and you talk to them and you try to kind of ask them the questions of what are you actually meaning by Qi. In my interpretation, and I have a doctor here who's probably going to smack me on the head and say that that's not true, but my interpretation is much more about looking at Qi in a different way, to look at Qi as a collection of energetic, mechanical and chemical in order to make an abstract construct. In other words, the ability or the function of something. So you have something in Chinese medicine like thoracic qi. Thoracic qi is the qi of the thoracic region. And it involves lots of different things, and the Chinese medical doctors will talk about how it moves and all the rest of it. But at the end of the day, it's more about talking about the abstract concept of all of its functioning ability. So the meridians, which you've probably seen lots of models with the meridians drawn on them, which again, modern science is starting to unpiece, and you're starting to see really interesting maps which map very closely to the meridians. That's a whole other discussion. So the bridge is starting to happen, but really the concept of qi in my approach, or the way that I'm looking at it, is ability. And that's how would you describe ability? If you took, say, Usain Bolt, and you said, you know, what's his ability? Well, his ability is made up of lots of different things. His ability is made up of his, you know, training, of his natural body mass, of his, you know, ability to do X, Y, Z, his, you know, things that he can control, things that he can't control, you know, and wrapped up together, it's the concept of how well something is functioning. So when somebody talks about liver qi deficiency, they're talking about, you know, the functioning ability of the collection of functions related to the liver. So when you talk about abstract concepts like qi, think about abstract concepts like ability and love. It's more about a collection of lots of different things that are very hard to pin down in order to come up with one word that describes it. What is yin and yang? Well, you've probably all heard of yin and yang, and you've certainly you've all seen that symbol. It's become one of those things that every Chinese medical clinic throws on their door. But, you know, yin and yang is a very far-reaching concept. You know, it's the concept of opposite and contrary forces that are actually interconnected, interdependent, and complementary with each other. And you can see this throughout nature and throughout the world, you know, that there are interdependent opposites that actually require each other in order for them to exist. And if you apply that to medicine, then you are basically taking the concept of homeostasis, which is a very well-known concept in Western medicine, but you are expanding it to include, you know, your individual type, your lifestyle, your environment, and trying to say, well, there's a balance that needs to be achieved not just internally, but externally as well, and those external factors have an impact on your health. Whether it be a balanced diet, a balanced work life, a balanced relationship, whether it be, you know, the ability to manage your time so that you're not overworking or being lazy, that you're not too sedentary, or you're not over-exercising. It's about trying to achieve that balance throughout your life, and I think that that's just very common sense. You know, everybody kind of understands that concept when you put it in that way, that you throw a yin and yang symbol in front of them and they're like, oh, I'm having to buy some sort of very ancient esoteric concept. It's not that. It's just a very simple thing. Keep your life in balance, because if you don't, then, you know, it's going to be very hard for you to get back to balance, and that will affect your health in some way. Finally, we'll talk about five-element theory, which again would need, you know, days of, there are many courses on five-element theory of learning, but essentially it's again these ancient masters, and I do call them masters because I'm continuously astounded at the insights that they managed to develop just by observation. That in general, there are, you know, they have seen in nature that there's a kind of interaction, there's an interactive process that happens in five elements. So in the case of, you know, 5 minutes here, wood is burnt to make fire, fire becomes earth, earth turns to metal, metal mineralizes water, water creates wood, but then you've also got the opposite, so water puts out fire, metal will cut wood, etc., etc. So you take a concept, you take a construct, you start to notice things in nature and you say, okay, this is happening in a lot of areas of nature. Maybe this is happening within our body, maybe this is happening within our lives, maybe we should look at this and figure out if it assists us in any way to make diagnoses or make treatments. And it's interesting, and this is a real cultural thing, I think. It's interesting that in Chinese medicine and in Chinese culture and Eastern culture in general, there's a lot of this kind of creation of patterns, this creation of concepts. And when they're not useful, they don't use them. And when they're useful, they do. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they're kind of not... That it doesn't always have to be that there's one way of doing something and that's the way it's done. You find the right way, you use the correct pattern that's going to work for a patient. So it's a different way of looking at the world. It's a different way of looking at treatment. It's about saying there are these patterns. There's yin and yang, there's qi, there's these five-element theory, and there's lots of other theories as well. And we're going to try to work on which is the right one to use for this client. So oftentimes there are organs, and we'll talk about organs in a second, Jiangfu organs, that are associated to different elements. And so if there's a certain wood element, then and it's depleted, then you will treat the mother element. So you're looking distally. You're looking to treat at distance in the same way that acupuncture treats at distance through the meridians. So you may have a headache, but you'll have an acupuncture needle stuck somewhere else, because it's all about treating at distance rather than approaching directly. So this is another concept in Chinese medicine. So, given all of those things, yin and yang, 5 elements, qi. Anybody who starts to work here, we have a kind of phrase here, which is like, we need you to become qi conscious, which is basically you need to kind of get out of your mindset of the material world, of materialism, or at least of this kind of very mechanical and chemical way of understanding anything and everything. And you need to start to look at these concepts of, how your external affects your internal. And the concepts of qi, the concepts of movement, the concepts of dynamism. And if you apply that to everyday life, then you start to recognize the importance of lifestyle. Because lifestyle is not something that is a choice that doesn't affect you internally. And I know that that is logical to probably each of you, but actually it's not really ingrained in medical science very much. So, air, breathing properly, getting fresh air. Breathing is one of those things that everyone thinks is kind of a natural thing that we all do, right? We all survive and we're all breathing. But how many people are actually really conscious of their breath and really training their breath? It's the same thing as anything in life. Yeah, you can naturally do it, but can you be good at it? And so, breathing is a really powerful, life-changing thing if you really focus on breath at any point during the day. Sometimes you say, take 5 minutes. I can hear some breaths going. This is good. It's about recognizing the importance of, bringing in air. But in Chinese medicine, they would say you're bringing in not just air. You're bringing in energy. You're bringing in external qi in some way. Diet, obviously important. We all know about vitamins, nutrients. We all know about the chemicals within certain plants and good things to eat and bad things to eat. And we can talk about that. And we've got a nutritionist speaking next week who will probably, give you lots of really amazing information about that. But, also look at it in terms of the energetics of food as well. And in Chinese medicine, they look at food in many different concepts of hot, cold, things that cause damp, things that cause you to dry. There's all sorts of elements that are brought in that when you combine it together with the nutrition and the kind of chemical side, actually there's amazing links that are happening, and you start to realize how these guys guys and ladies, I should say, in China, really actually were quite ahead of their game in terms of their thought, and the patterns that they saw actually do ring true many times. Exercise, very important. Qigong is the ultimate example of that. Being able to trying to build and move qi for health through prescribed movements. But exercise, as we all know, is very, very good for you in moderation. Remember, yin and yang, you can't do anything in excess. You talk about things like bad backs or, bad shoulders and bad posture, and, we're all sitting in front of the computer or we're all looking at our phone all the time, and, this is causing a lot of problems. And you can look at it in terms of lots of different things, but the Chinese would also look at it in terms of the flow of qi. If you're hunched up, then blood is not going to flow properly, and therefore qi is not going to flow properly through your meridians and through your blood vessels, and that's going to impact and cause stagnation, which is going to potentially lead to problems like pain and stiffness. External factors, as simple as the weather. We all know that we're more likely to catch a cold in the winter than in the summer, right? But, it goes further than that, and different people are suited to different conditions. Temperature, hot, cold. We all know people that are cold all the time and people that are hot all the time, and how that relates. And so you have all these theories that have been built up in Chinese medicine to explain that too. And also, finally, the psychoemotional state. The concept that your emotions are not separate from your body, that your emotions have a major impact on your health. And this is constantly being borne out, right, in medical studies, that, you know, your happiness, your sadness, anxiety, depression, you know, one of the big things about cancer in general is the whole fear, the culture of fear which is spread around cancer, which is not necessarily, you know, a helpful thing to spread, because all you're doing is further impacting people's lives in a negative way. And we also know people that exhaust us, right? There are some people that you just can't be around for too long because you're going to be exhausted. And there are some people that give you energy, and you walk out of a room with them and you feel like, wow, I feel like I'm ready to really, you know, turn a new chapter in my life, or I've got, you know, a new sense of motivation. I've been given energy. And again, in Chinese medicine, this is all explained in the theories of qi. It's all explained in the theories of how your environment affects you, how energy of other people affect you, and you may need different things at different times in your life. So all in all, Chinese medicine looks at your internal health, looks at your internal balance, factors in as much data as they possibly can about your lifestyle, your history, everything, which is why if you go to a Chinese medical doctor, you will tend to have a good half an hour where they're asking you the most seemingly bizarre questions, because at the end of the day, they're trying to dig deep into understanding your whole internal and external environment in order to start to try to get an understanding of symptoms that you are experiencing. If you do go to a Chinese medical doctor, what you will experience is you will have a whole process where you'll be questioned, all sorts of questions that you may think are completely irrelevant to the symptoms that you have come exhibiting. They will observe, and a lot of the time, a lot of the training that is given to Chinese doctors is this kind of observation, which is done without your knowledge, you know, all the way from smelling to listening to the way that you speak, and it's all about trying to assess, you know, various different patterns. They're trying to understand, you know, how all of these things relate to your current condition. Tongue diagnosis is a big thing, so the idea that you can get a good idea of somebody's internal state of health through their tongue and through their pulse diagnosis, which is a very complicated thing there, and underneath that little black cloth, you can reveal it. There's a little machine to test different pulses. And finally, looking at Western diagnosis as well. So, you know, integration is the key here. We don't want to just ignore, you know, Western medical science has lots of data that can assist a Chinese medical doctor to make a diagnosis. And the diagnosis tends to be a syndrome diagnosis. A syndrome basically means a collection of symptoms, which in Chinese medicine, they've grouped together and go, well, those symptoms kind of usually belong together if you suffer from a certain syndrome. So it's about, again, looking at patterns. Quickly talking about Jiangfu organs. If you ever go to a Chinese doctor and they start to talk about liver qi stagnation or rising qi in your kidneys or whatever it may be, they are not talking about your anatomical organs, okay? They're not talking about your anatomical organs. They're talking, again, about what these, and this is why the language needs to change, because it's so confusing for so many people. They're talking about, you know, these, a collection of functions that are associated to an organ. Okay, so in the example of kidneys, the kidneys' function is to help excretion, but it also relates to sexual function, relates to lots of other functions as well. And so, you know, when they're talking about your kidney, they're not just talking about your anatomical organ, they're talking about a lot of different things. So Jiangfu organs is a collection of physical, emotional, and psychological functions grouped together as a function. And the ancients gave those names to organs, which was unfortunate because it's causing a lot of confusion, which is why we're trying to change the language. So if you ever go to a Chinese doctor, make sure you understand that. And finally, as I said, syndromes basically is a collection of symptoms which have been observed to be interrelated. Again, through thousands of years of observation, they start to say, oh, interesting, if you have that symptom and that and that and that, and you're experiencing them together, then we bunch it into a certain syndrome that we can then treat. You may have the same symptom, but if it's not in combination with that symptom, then we're going to bunch it with this syndrome. And so this is how Chinese doctors will take the same symptom being exhibited, but treat it in many different ways because it's being done according to syndrome differentiation rather than simply kind of symptom bashing. It's about trying to kind of piece together all the different things, which is again why they ask you lots of questions, because they're trying to kind of, so it's detective work. It's trying to work out which syndrome or syndromes you are suffering from. Okay, so in Chinese medicine theory, the simplistic model is they look at your predisposed personality, your predisposed body type, combine it with your lifestyle and your environment, combine it with your mental and emotional state and your physical condition, so all of those together, not just physical condition, and they then try to get some understanding of the symptoms that you are exhibiting. Oops. So let's look at those dogmas that we saw before and look at how Chinese medicine conflicts with those dogmas. And again, things are changing. There's a real kind of shift which is happening, which is really encouraging to see. So the idea of materialism, well, in Chinese medicine, material energy are the same thing. And this is, again, modern physics. It's not so modern anymore, but this is something that has been known in physics for decades now, that, you know, the separation of material and energy is in many ways an irrelevance. Insular, the idea that, you know, we are the lumbering robots of Richard Dawkins. In Chinese medicine, your health is affected by not just what you take in, not just the chemicals that you breathe in or you eat, but is affected by the people around you, the job that you do, you know, your obviously things like sleep patterns, your relationships, all of these things are going to affect your health in some way. And you know, the relatively new science of epigenetics is now starting to look at how gene expression is being changed by your environment, and that's just one example of how science is starting to move on similar platforms to the ancient ways of thinking. The separation of mind, body, and spirit, that's, again, something that Chinese medicine just doesn't do. It's all part and parcel of the same thing. And you can see, you know, psychosomatic, you know, the evidence that your mind can affect your health. You look at placebo effect, which is something which is continuously being used as a stick to bash medicine, but in fact, it's one of the most incredible effects around, and it should be something that should be funded. It should be something that we spend billions on to try and understand the placebo effect, to try and understand how just through thought and through belief we can affect our physical health. That's an amazing concept, and yet it's kind of considered to be an annoyance, something to beat in a randomized controlled trial, and placebo is getting stronger, right? So it's harder and harder to beat those placebo effects. And there's also nocebo. You can see that the opposite can happen. And finally, evidence. Chinese medicine, we could talk for hours about why Chinese medicine doesn't do RCTs or why there are fewer RCTs in Chinese medicine. There are probably over, I think it's 70 or 80,000. So it's not like there aren't any. But essentially, you know, really what's happening is that it's a very, very difficult box to fit this medicine, personalized treatments, difficult to create placebos, lots of different reasons. And really we should be looking at using RCTs where necessary and using outcome-based evidence data as much as possible. Because really, at the end of the day, that's what matters. Did it help people? Rather than did a certain number of people achieve significance that could be repeated. And so there is a move, and the politics of medicine is moving towards outcome-based medicine, and that's something that, you know, we are encouraging. Okay, so my big thing is perspective, and I see any speech that I give, I tend to kind of talk about this, and the idea is that, you know, East and West thinking is the primary difference between East and West thinking, and I'm not just bundling East and West, it could be holistic versus, you know, material science thinking, is the concept of perspective, the idea of the Newtonian way of looking at things versus the quantum way of looking at things. Both are right? It's not about right or wrong. It's about what is going to be the most useful at any one time. Right? We all know that our position as an observer affects reality. Where we are looking at something is going to affect not just its reality to us, but it's going to actually change its reality. So you look at light, you look at all these different things in quantum mechanics, and you can take that perspective idea and you can filter it out ad nauseum to almost anything, and we're going to do it with cancer a little bit later. But the idea of a reductionist model versus a holistic model, the idea of a microscopic way of looking at the world versus a macroscopic way of looking at the world, and really, again, it's not about, both are correct. It's about choosing the right one, or ideally trying to put them all together to create a whole sense of truth. And I've written down here wine and tea. For those of you who know, probably not many of you do, I am a real tea obsessive. One of the things about that I find really interesting is the Chinese invented a lot of things, right? We know the list. If you go to Wikipedia, they invented a lot of things. One thing they didn't invent is glass, right? And the reason why they didn't invent glass is because they drank tea. Tea you drink usually in porcelain. Now it's changing, but you drink in porcelain or you drink in clay. The West, like their wines. And so glass developed much more in the West. And so lenses could be developed in the West. Now, Chinese history in terms of lenses, telescopes, microscopes, it's very, very limited. And so they were forced to look at the world from a macro way, right? They were forced to find truth by stepping back, looking at patterns. Whereas, in the West, we had lenses we could start to zoom in and try to find truth in detail. And again, both are right. It's just about not being fixated on one perspective. It's about trying to create a whole. One of the classic things is how to paint an elephant, and this is again a theme which I talk about a lot, which is, my father always used to say to me as a kid, how would you paint an elephant? And I would say, what do you mean? And he'd say, well, do you go close? Do you paint the detail of the skin, or do you step back and draw the shape? And that's a very simple example of this concept of perspective. Which one is true? Which one is more accurate? They're both accurate in their own way. They just are presenting a different angle or a different position of observation. Okay, finally, half an hour later, 45 minutes later, we get onto the subject in hand, which is cancer. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to go through some of the Western thinking of cancer and go through some of that in order to set a base for me to compare it to the Chinese medical thinking. So I apologize if you know some of this already, but I just think it's worth going through it. So Weinberg and Hanahan's traits of cancer cells started off, I think, with 6 and now has expanded to 10. But these are some of them. Self-sufficiency in growth. In other words, the accelerator pedal is on. That they evade growth-suppressing signals. That they are resisting cell death, apoptosis being the main concept of cell death. The ability to evade the immune system is a relatively new one, and is something that I think is a bit controversial because there's a real belief that your immune system can attack cancer, and that it doesn't just evade it. It's not an inherent trait of cancer cells, which is why I put my own personal question mark on that one. And that kind of relates to the concept of immortality, the idea that the cell cannot die. Cancer doesn't want to die. Enable replicative immortality, induce a blood supply, angiogenesis. Angiogenesis, for those of you who don't know, basically means that the cancer cell is throwing out angiogenic factor to try and build up a blood supply in order for it to feed and also potentially to spread. And a lot of drugs and a lot of therapies are looking at trying to combat that. So anti-angiogenesis is something that is found in a lot of herbs, and we'll talk about that later. So you can see how some of the herbs can affect or inhibit angiogenesis. The ability to spread to distant sites, to metastasize, and this is again a relatively new one, promoting inflammation, which then allows it to damage cells around it and spread further. So this is the concept of growth and replication. Finally, you've got the reprogramming of the energy metabolism, which we'll talk about a little bit later, and the famous genome instability, the mutations that are happening within the DNA. And these are the areas that are looked at, you know, in terms of framing potential causation for cancer. So the SMT theory, the somatic mutation theory, which is the prevailing theory and continues to be the prevailing theory, although again things are changing, is that you have a cell that is affected by a carcinogen or an oncovirus in some way, and that causes multiple mutations to the DNA at particular oncogene sites, which then leads to cell proliferation and this uncontrolled proliferation, and the mechanisms to evade cell death develop, and there's this genome instability and an altered metabolism. So that's the somatic mutation theory. Again, I apologize if you know all this already, but it's worth going through it for those that don't. The Cancer Genome Atlas was the big, the big thing, and it was a huge project to basically find a cure for cancer by uncovering and exposing the main genetic mutation sites on DNA, which then they could target to try to find drugs which can help to cure cancer. And this has been going on for many years. And the problems with SMT is that it was made way more complicated than they imagined in terms of the number of mutational oncogene sites. There were hundreds found, and it made the idea of targeted drugs a much more difficult concept to get their head around. Also, one of the key things is that TCGA demonstrated that there was heterogeneity between, first of all, between different people suffering from the same cancer. So in other words, the mutation sites were different for anybody suffering from any particular cancer. There were differences between them. Also, intratumoral, so within an actual tumor, there was differences. So how it's very difficult to create targeted drugs when even within a particular tumor you have this variation in the mutations. So what markers are you using in order to direct your drugs? And intermetastatic, so once the cancer had spread, that at different remote sites in your body, again, it was different. There was differences, but there are differences between the mutation sites. And this basically, combined with the belief, and I don't know enough about the science of it, so I'm not going to go too deep into it, but there seems to be a consensus that the idea that these DNA mutations are spontaneous, if you look at the rate at which that would happen, it's very, very, very low compared to the incidence of cancer. And so you've got these three things that kind of send a little bit of an alarm bell to anybody studying the SMT theory, because it kind of demonstrates that there's a lot more complexity, that the targets are continuously moving, that the gene sites are not some stable, nice pattern that we can create easy drugs for, and that actually the whole concept of the DNA mutation rates are very different from the actual cancer rates. And so what's happened recently is that they're throwing in the concept of dark matter, which is just another way of saying there is some unknown force out there that's adding this layer of complexity to the whole problem, and we need to uncover it in the same way that exists in the universe. So there's this concept of dark matter in order to keep the theory alive. And it is we'll go back to perspective, it's a very close-up way of looking at cancer, right? It's again, this obsession with finding truth in the absolute finite detail, the final site, which is the cancer, which are the sites where the oncogenes are, which are the mutations which lead to cancer. Let's dive right in, let's map them out, let's use all of our programming power that we've got, and let's create this network, this database of very detailed sites that we can use to treat. And yet, this is still the prevailing theory, even though we've got all of these problems in the theory. And I have to say that it's making well, it means that you've got a continuously moving target. It means that the drug companies are having to really try to be as creative as possible in order to find targeted drugs. And it seems like it's a very unstable route to go down, and yet it continues to be something that is pursued quite religiously. And we have to ask the question why, and I think there's various different reasons why. Again, I bring back perspective. I think that people love to find truth in the detail in the West. Profit, obviously, targeted drugs are much easier to patent than anything else, right? Because it's very, very particular. The closer you go in, the more defined, the more differentiation that you can do, the easier it is for you to make profit out of it. And I think that generally there's a lot of people invested in this theory. Researchers are invested in it, whole institutions are invested in it. They've spent decades invested in this. So it's very difficult to say, hold on, I think what you've been doing for the past 20 years might be wrong. It's not an easy thing to take. And so I think there's a resistance to it. Now, I'm going to talk about the metabolic theory. That doesn't necessarily mean that I am, sold on the metabolic theory. There are other theories out there. I know there's tissue organizational theories. There's other theories out there. But the metabolic theory is one that is very, which has caught a lot of people's imagination and has really kind of made people rethink the concept of cancer in a very interesting way. So Warburg, scientist in Nazi Germany, discovered that cancer cells have a very distinct, unique feature, which is pretty much across the board on virtually all cancer cells, in that they ferment sugar. Even within an oxygen-rich environment, they will ferment rather than aerobic respiration. So he was adamant that cancer, above all other diseases, has countless secondary causes, and maybe we are chasing the secondary causes here with the somatic mutation theory. But even for cancer, there is only one prime cause. Summarized in a few words, the prime cause of cancer is the replacement of the respiration of oxygen in normal body cells by a fermentation of sugar. In other words, this switch in the way that the cell produces its energy, in the way that it survives. The power plants within the cells themselves change in a very dramatic way. And that Otto Warburg felt that this was the key signature marker and was the area which needed to be addressed. And unfortunately, his theory got lost in the somatic mutation theory, and now had come with a huge resurgence. And Yes to Life had their annual conference. And if you want to find out more about the metabolic theory, get their videos. Those videos are incredible, where they're talking a lot about that, because it really, it's definitely a fascinating area that warrants further investigation. So, is there any support for this theory? Well, the PET scan, which is the way of, one of the ways, or the way of determining cancer in somebody, is based upon this theory, because they're looking for, they do glucose markers and they send them in, so that they're looking for cells which are bloated with sugar, because a cancer cell which is fermenting, the fermentation process is a very inefficient process compared to aerobic respiration, and so it's having to suck up loads and loads of glucose. It's having to bloat itself with glucose and spew out a lot of lactic acid, which then damages nearby cells and helps it to grow. And so it's this demand, this requirement for huge amounts of glucose. Glutamine as well they use for fuel, but glucose is the preferred fuel source, and it's a way to actually light up cancer cells so you can see them. And Pedersen, huge figure. Again, I'm just touching the surface. There's lots of information about him, and all of his colleagues doing lots and lots of research into metabolic theory. He's one of the pioneers, and he created or he helped to develop the PET scan. And then in the 80s, there was a remarkable experiment that was done that when I read about it, and I'm sure Sue, you probably can say the same thing. When people find out that this experiment happened, there's like, well, why is this not being talked about more? So what happened is they took a normal cell and a cancer cell. So the somatic mutation theory goes that there's mutation within the nucleus, within the DNA, within your genes that happens here, and that this mutation is what is the primary cause of cancer. Obviously, the mutation has come from carcinogens, from external stresses of some kind, but this is the cause of cancer. That's the somatic mutation theory in a simplified form. So what they did was they took a cancer cell and they removed the nucleus from it, and they replaced it with a healthy nucleus, a normal nucleus, an unmutated nucleus. And they discovered that that cell continued to behave like a cancer cell. So even though the DNA in the nucleus was normal, unmutated, it still behaved like a cancer cell. They then did the opposite, where they took a normal cell and they put a nucleus from a cancer cell and they transplanted it into that normal cell, and this cell acted normally. So this is a major thing, and as I said, I couldn't believe it when I first heard about this, that the whole idea of the concept of the cause of cancer is that this is the problem, and yet you transfer it to a normal cell and the cell is perfectly happy and perfectly fine. Whereas you take a normal nucleus and you put it into a damaged cytoplasm and you have a proliferation of the cancer cells. And so the idea, the overarching idea around Warburg, but he couldn't experiment because he didn't have the equipment, and the metabolic theory in general, is that the problem comes from within the cytoplasm. And specifically, they're looking at the mitochondria. So the mitochondria being your power plants, the mitochondria being the ancient bacteria that we created a symbiotic relationship with all way back when individual cells got together and decided to make multicellular organisms. This bacteria, this ancient bacteria, if something goes wrong with that, it can lead to a cascading events which basically means that the switches in the way that the cell behaves returns to either an undifferentiated embryonic or potentially kind of single cell state where it's all about me, it's not about the organism anymore, right? I am going to proliferate, right? So this ancient bacteria might be kind of rebelling, essentially. So the damage to the mitochondria, which is proven again and again in all cancer cells, you look at cancer cells, the mitochondria are impaired, the mitochondria are damaged. So then you start to look at the smoking gun, which came first? The DNA. And the somatic mutation theory advocates will say the DNA was damaged and that led to damage in the cell and that led to all sorts of things which led to the mitochondria being damaged. But this experiment pretty much, I think, is very, very, I'm not going to say conclusive, but is very, very engaging. So the normal nucleus in the cancer cell cytoplasm remains a cancer cell, whereas a cancer cell nucleus in normal cell cytoplasms stay normal. And this is basically the crux of the metabolic theory, the very basic kind of foundations of the metabolic theory. And the beauty of the metabolic theory is that it removes the necessity for differentiation within cancer, because if all cancer cells act in this way, we no longer have to find the specific mutation sites of a liver cancer cell, the specific mutation sites of a lung cancer cell, and then try to find targeted drugs specifically for that, especially knowing that even if you did find a targeted drug that attacks, that uses that target, if there's heterogeneity within a tumor, it's only going to attack a certain proportion of that tumor. It's not going to attack all of it, right? And so this way you have something which removes differentiation between cancer cells, and I think that is a huge, huge thing. And what it does is it also accentuates differentiation between healthy cells and cancer cells, right? So you've got this double whammy where you can say, I know all cancer cells have this one unique feature, and I know that normal cells don't have this feature. So you can increase differentiation with normal cells and reduce differentiation within cancer cells. We also have a potential cause, and again, we're not going to get ahead of ourselves here, right? It's a potential cause, which is some sort of mitochondrial damage. And I think, you know, the closer we come to a cause, the more likely we're going to be able to find some solutions. And we also can understand the necessary environment and food source for cancer cells. And again, I don't want to oversimplify this, right? But it's worth you investigating it if you're interested, and if you don't know the metabolic theory of cancer already. But essentially, you know, you starve the cancer by taking away its fuel source, and we know that its fuel source primarily is glucose and glutamine. So we've got stable target rather than a moving target, and we've got much clearer environmental conditions that we know are suitable and therefore unsuitable for cancer to proliferate. Then you throw in epigenetics, which is a whole other curveball which is thrown in, and epigenetics is the concept that genes, that you may have DNA, but that DNA is wrapped up and only certain genes are exposed. And your environment, your entire experience, and even your inherited experience, so the experiences of your parents, can have an effect at actually changing which genes are revealed. So even though your code is locked, you have your DNA code, epigenetics basically is saying those genes can be expressed in different ways, right? Your genes, you can turn on, you can turn off genes through experience, through your environment, through everything, your whole life experience. And this means that your body is very, in some ways, it's a great thing because you can adapt, right? Your gene expression can adapt according to your environment. But if it goes wrong, and there's a lot of thought that potentially this switch that happens in cancer cells could be potentially at least influenced by epigenetics, then things can go wrong as well. So, you know, epigenetic mechanisms include your development, environmental chemicals, drugs, pharmaceuticals, aging, diet. As I said, there's some evidence, I don't know how controversial it is, but there is some evidence that you actually inherit epigenetics from your parents too. That even though most of your DNA is kind of, your slate is wiped clean, this is your code, that you actually do inherit, you know, aspects of epigenetics from your parents. And the health endpoints you can see here, which are associated with epigenetics, are here. And Pedersen and the scientists involved, including South Korean Young Ko, these scientists are have been doing incredible work with epigenetics and trying to understand this switch that happens in cancer. Maybe that switch is caused by mitochondrial damage. Maybe the mitochondrial damage is caused by the switch. But it's this switch that happens that turns a normal cell into a fermenting machine, into a cell which is essentially broken its contract with multicellular symbiosis. So epigenetics brings us back to this, right? Again, I'm not trying to oversimplify it. I know that there's still a lot of ground to be made up in between, but it's finally giving us an explanation for how the environment, how every experience that you do, including the Chinese medical viewpoint would be including the people in your lives, including, you know, everything from the air that you breathe, the pollution that you breathe, to the most discrete things, could potentially actually start to affect you on a cellular level. And that's, I think, quite an amazing area that needs more exploration. So epigenetics could cause changes to mitochondria and or cell DNA. This may switch the cell to exhibit the traits of a cancer cell, including genomic instability. In other words, perhaps the mutated genes are not the cause, but they are the effect, right? So once the mitochondria becomes damaged and this switch happens, then you've got genomic instability, then you get mutations. The scientists looking down the lens of a microscope go, oh, all cancer cells have mutations, and they're using that as the smoking gun. Whereas, you know, it's worth exploring potential other reasons for it. Okay, so this is, again, simplistic, but a kind of snapshot of my interpretation of the metabolic theory, that you have stressors in your life, pollutants, carcinogens, your lifestyle, anything, a poor diet. And I'm throwing in there high in sugar and carbs because I'm a great believer in this, but if you want to explore other theories, then that's fine. This is one area which I think is a problem. And also stress and emotions and your whole environmental makeup, your whole life, all of the stresses that you are experiencing. You combine that with your genetics, and it's interesting because a lot of people who support the somatic mutation theory say, well, the metabolic theory kind of doesn't work because we've demonstrated that certain people are predisposed to certain cancers because they have certain gene sites, etc. But the metabolic theory guys say that those particular genes that are associated with high risk of cancer also can affect potential mitochondrial damage. So it could actually be that those genes are affecting your mitochondria, and your mitochondria are more likely to become affected by these stresses. So inherited genes, inherited epigenetics, and your biological age. We can't get away from that one. The biggest risk factor in cancer is age. That's something which is not talked about enough, I think. But, the biological age is a major, the biggest factor in terms of risk of cancer. So you take these three things, you then, these may cause epigenetic changes of gene expression, which are either caused or due to mitochondrial damage. And that means that the switch is turned on or off, however you want to put it, and the cell returns to it's Paul Davies, is it? Paul Davies? Well, Davies refers to an atavistic state. In other words, the broken contract, the idea that, the cell is saying, no, I'm going to be independent now, and I'm doing my own thing. And this whole multicellular symbiotic thing, I'm not going to do that anymore, and I'm going to return to a primordial state. And the theory goes that in primordial times there was less oxygen, it was an oxygen-rich environment, so it had to survive through fermentation. And so this mechanism of survival and proliferation in very hard, stressed situations, potentially with a lot of stresses, that ancient code is being kicked in. That's being switched on in some way. That's one of the theories that Paul Davies is pushing. It's interesting because he's a physicist, right? I think he's a physicist, so he's coming at... Sorry? Okay, right. So he's taking, again, perspective. He's taking a look at cancer from a completely different angle. He's coming up with really interesting concepts around it. But whether or not it's an atavistic state, a primordial state, it certainly mimics embryonic states, the idea of increased cell proliferation without cell differentiation, and the state of altered metabolism. And if your immune system is insufficient, and I am a great believer in the immune system, and I know Chinese medicine is too, if your immune system is insufficient, that it can't recognize that this is happening, it goes unchecked, and that this leads to a diagnosis of cancer. And many people believe that, and it is for some people a scary thought, that this is happening all the time, and that our immune system is keeping it into check. Again, that's something to explore, but a lot of people do believe that this is happening all the time, and this process is going on, and our immune system quite happily soaks it up. But this is a major factor. And so you start to look at cause and effect, and you start to say, well, what's the cause and all the rest of it? Essentially, what you're looking at is multiple things happening all at the same time in order to bring about this disease. And in a way, it's kind of a bit futile to just try to focus on one thing, and you should be looking again with a slightly different perspective. And so we look at what is driving cancer rates, the fact that it's approaching number one killer in the Western world. And I would highlight these boxes here. Inherited genes, inherited epigenetics, not something that you really can do much about, but you can certainly make changes to your lifestyle, like it or loathe it. You have control over that. A lot of people don't like control over their own health. They prefer to just rely on a doctor, but this is yours. to control. You know, biological age, we are, you know, Western medicine has done an incredible job at increasing lifespan through producing drugs to stop infectious disease, right? And we've got problems with microbial resistance now, but, you know, that's a whole other subject. But, you know, it's been remarkable. It's revolutionized, you know, I mean, you know, 200 years ago, mortality rates and especially infant mortality rates were so much higher. So we're all living longer, and therefore, by definition, there's going to be more people who develop cancer. But then this as well, insufficient immune response. And, you know, how much of this is affecting that? Chinese medicine would say a lot. Okay, so what is the ultimate environment for cancer? If you take this metabolic theory and you kind of then extrapolate it out, the ultimate environment for cancer is a high toxic load, lots of carcinogens, lots of pollution, lots of bad things that you're eating. We all know what's good and bad for us, and we can talk about it more. And next week's speech, there'll be lots of detail about that. But, you know, making sure that we have a good diet. Oxygen, we talked about breathing before. And, you know, I think that it's not talked about enough, right? You know, how much we should focus on our breath and how much we should focus on being in really, you know, breathing in oxygen. It's fundamental, and it's not an environment that cancer likes, a high oxygen environment. A weakened immune system, and there's talk about pH, but I think that's a whole other discussion. So, lifestyle, diet, emotional health, all of these things are controllable things. So take back control of that, look at all of these areas, and you have really powerful potential modalities for prevention and management. Something else that is a real annoyance of mine is food and medicine, and the desire by the powers that be, influenced by the lobbyists that they are influenced by, to split a line between food and medicine, which is just the most absurd thing in the world, right? Even the Hippocratic oath, right? Hippocrates, let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food. You know, it was from the very beginning, food is your first medicine, okay? And we are creating dividing lines, and we're creating dividing lines in order to instill control. Drug companies want to control the medicine. Big food companies want to control the food. They want to make sure that food is stripped away from the idea of medicine, and that, I think, is probably one of the biggest travesties in our society. And I have a problem because I sell tea, right? I cannot write anything about tea. If I write anything about the health benefits of tea, I'm going to get bashed, which is crazy, because if you look at the science, and you'll see some of it later, tea is an incredibly healthy lifestyle habit to bring in. I've gone to meetings with the MHRA, and the level of absurdity is insane. Right? I'll have meetings with the MHRA, and I'm saying, okay, we've got to stop this. You know, we've got herbs. What is a medicine? What is a food? When is it a food supplement? When is it, you know, all of this stuff that's happening. And they say, okay, Don, the definition of a food is that it cannot have a physiological effect. At that point, I look around for the camera, like, did you honestly just say that to me? He said, yeah, it can't have a physiological effect. I'm saying, water. Garlic. I'm rendered speechless by this kind of mentality, and it's this kind of pigeonholing in order to say, no, that doesn't belong to my department, that belongs to that department, which is stripping knowledge away from the public. And then they say to me, oh, and the other thing is, it's really important, food by definition can't cause harm. So I'm like, well, you go and eat lots of nitrate-filled salami your whole life, and then come back and tell me that it doesn't, you know, there is no logic in this. There's zero logic in it. And it's something that we should all be furious about, because they're taking away information and they're doing it under the guise of protecting your health, protecting your safety, because we don't want any bogus medical claims, right? Because that could be dangerous, right? They don't give you enough respect to say you can do your own research. You can find out what's bogus and not. We have to do it in our everyday life all the time, right? We have to decipher what's, excuse the language, bullshit from real, right? And yet they're saying, no, you can't write anything healthy about food. You can't write anything good about, And I say to them, well, what about 5 a day? The government's constantly saying 5 a day, 5 a day, 5 a day. And like, yeah, that's not a medical claim. That's just a lifestyle recommendation. It's like, so it's different rules when it's different companies involved, or different, aspects pulling their ear. So the idea that separating medicine from food removes our collective responsibility to eat healthy. It's ridiculous dietary recommendations. I know Rob Verkerk from Alliance for Natural Health and I share this opinion that the dietary recommendations which are given as healthy diet, I think, is quite erroneous. And the inability to discuss health benefits of food, I think, is a travesty, and we should be banging down the doors, because our health and our children's health are going to be affected by it. Give you an example of the absurdity. EFSA, European Food Safety Association, they released a register, I can't remember when it was, I think it was about 7 years ago or something, and they said, all right, you can make health claims about food, but it needs to come through us and we need to approve it first, right? So everyone said, finally, we're in a situation where we've got an association that is going to look at our health claims, and they're going to, obviously give them the right checks and balances that they need so that we can put them on our packaging so that people can be helped. But the level of bureaucracy and the level of myopic vision is just absurd, to the point where most of the applications, it was something in the region of 80 to 90% of the applications were rejected. And I just want to show you one, which you probably can't read here, but I'll read it down here, which is for water, right? So this is the health claim that water companies wanted to write for water. Water is an essential nutrient for life. Water helps bodily functions to work properly. Water facilitates other nutrients to work properly. Water carries nutrients throughout the whole body. Water helps remove waste products from the body. The response from EFSA was, in classic, legal language, non-compliance with the regulation, because on the basis of the scientific evidence assessed, this claim effect for this food is not sufficiently defined to be able to be assessed, and the claims could therefore not be substantiated. So I'm just trying to demonstrate the level of absurdity that we're dealing with in the food and health world, that you can't even say water is an essential thing for you. That it's that level of craziness, and it's those levels of hoops that you have to jump through, and you have to, when you have this level of absurdity, you have to question what's driving it. You have to question it, because there's nothing else. There's no other explanation other than there's something going on, because this is just mad. So food and medicine, and this moves on to metabolic theory and the ketogenic diet. I'm not going to talk too much about it, although I'm very passionate about this, because I follow the ketogenic protocol for the past 2.5 years, and it has really transformed my life and my health, so I'm a great believer in it. However, belief is potentially a dogma, so we'll break that apart. This is just a concept for you to take away with you. If cancer survives on sugar, glucose, then let's not eat glucose too much. Let's reduce our sugar intake, and the ketogenic approach is that you burn fuel through ketones, ketone bodies, which basically means you eat fat, and that fat gets converted to ketones, and healthy cells can use ketones to create energy. In fact, it's a super clean fuel for healthy for cells, including your brain, and ketones cannot be used by cancer cells. So you have a clear food source that you can take in, which cancer cells cannot use and you can use. And I think that that's a very powerful thing. Now, I know a lot of people prescribe lots of different diets for cancer, and I'm not going to get embroiled in that. But I think that if you follow the metabolic theory of cancer, then this is definitely something which raises eyebrows and is something that I would recommend you look into. Because cutting out carbohydrates and cutting out sugar, it may sound like a fad diet. It may sound like one of those, like, oh yeah, it's just the latest trend, and I don't know, whoever Angelina Jolie's doing it, she probably isn't, but you know what I mean? It's that whole thing of diet and, you know, lifestyle trends, and there's always the latest thing in the Atkins diet. But actually, when you actually read about the ketogenic approach, it's a really fascinating thing, and it goes back to the ideas, you know, of what our food sources were before. The statistics that I saw recently was that in the 1700s we were eating something like 4 pounds of sugar. I'm sorry, the statistics were from an American site, so I'm going to talk in pounds. 4 pounds of sugar a year, and now we're eating on average around 180 to 200 pounds of sugar a year. So it's a massive, massive change. How is your body dealing with that? Is your body able to evolve that quickly? Are your genes able to evolve that quickly to have this sudden influx of sugar? Why are cancer rates going up? Interesting that they have a metabolic shift where they ferment sugar. All of these things, for me, adds together to make a very interesting argument for some of the reasons why cancer rates are so high. So, ketone bodies, super clean fuel for all healthy cells, and it cannot be used by cancer cells. Increases the antioxidant protection of healthy cells, so it does more than just feed it. It increases the antioxidant protection of the cells. It helps the cell to create glutathione, which is the key antioxidant to protecting its health, and it does the opposite in cancer cells. It means that the cancer cells cannot create as much glutathione, therefore they are much more susceptible to oxidative stress. And if you are going to have chemotherapy or you're going to have any of those treatments, then having a ketone-based diet before that means that the effectiveness, and this has been shown in many studies, the effectiveness of the chemotherapy is vastly improved because of the fact that these cells, these cancer cells, are put into a weakened state before you give them this assault on them. Ketones are anti-angiogenic. We talked about angiogenesis and the requirement for cancer to build its own blood supply. Ketones are anti-inflammatory. Inflammatory response is very much tied in with cancer theory. Ketones reduce obesity, help to bring you down to a normal weight. I may not be completely normal weight, but you should have seen me a few years ago. So it's definitely one of the risk factors for cancer is being overweight. Interestingly, ketones have been shown to preserve and protect mitochondrial health. So if you again follow the metabolic theory of cancer, then that's obviously one of the most key things is to protect your mitochondria. And there's some evidence to suggest that ketones may actually help to kill cancer cells. So I'm not going to proclaim the magic diet that's going to cure cancer. I'm sure there's lots of people that have done that before. But I think that if you follow the metabolic theory and you follow the thread and you look at the evidence from lots of people, and Travis, who spoke at the Yes to Life, again, get their videos because it's a really great video, and get his book, Tripping Over the Truth. Travis's book, Tripping Over the Truth, is a really great book. And you look at it, it's a very fascinating road to go down. And I personally can speak from experience that this diet has transformed my life, not just in terms of weight loss, but also in terms of energy, in terms of my ability to think, in terms of my ability to work, in terms of my whole aspect of my health has been transformed by this. So it may seem like I'm just preaching a little bit, but definitely explore it. I really highly recommend that you guys explore it. Okay. So, therefore, what is the ecosystem of cancer? And I think it's important that we talk about the ecosystem of cancer rather than cancer as a singular thing, as this kind of, again, microscopic thing. it's important that we look at the forest and not the trees. It's really fundamental that we don't get too sucked into the minutiae of detail for the expense of the forest. We look at the environment and we look at the history. We understand what has to change, the environment that is suited to cancer, and therefore what is the environment that's not suited to cancer. One of the things that I find very disturbing is this real promotion of fear. You know, the cancer has got such a weight to it in terms of a word, right? And if you start to kind of break down that fear, this is not to say that you don't take it seriously, nothing like that. But if you start to break down that fear, I think you start to look at it in a slightly different way. And that is a positive way, which means that you're more likely to achieve better outcomes for your life rather than just kind of being so racked with anxiety that you end up depleting your immune system and potentially exacerbating your situation. The desire to kill, the desire to destroy rather than to manage, the desire to eradicate all cancer from your body, as opposed to saying, well, you know, this potentially is something that's a natural process that happens, and we just need to work out the environment in order to control it and manage it, and that we can lead all perfectly healthy lives with, you know, the odd cancer cell floating around in our body. This concept that you need to eradicate is a very kind of, I think, a very dangerous process, because it leads people down to an obsession with destruction. Treat the ecosystem as the priority rather than chasing moving targets. So you got your cancer cells, you know, if you blanket bomb it with toxic agents, you may reduce the cancer, but you're going to potentially prime the environment for future cancer growth. And this is constantly being shown out in lots of different areas. And look, I'm not bashing chemotherapy. I'm not. You know, sometimes it's necessary. I want to make that clear. But it is something that I think we need to address, this kind of approach, this whole approach. The attack method is sometimes necessary, but done alone will lead to an environment suitable for the enemy. The lack of specificity of targets due to the heterogeneity, which we talked about before, means that the drugs are likely to be either ineffective or blanket bombing of all cells. We have to engage in an epigenetic diplomacy and strive to make the environmental conditions unsuitable for cancer, but suitable for healthy cells. And we could take this concept and we could extrapolate it in lots of things in society. I just have to say terrorism as one of them, right? This concept that we need to destroy, we need to create this war, right, on terrorism. And all that you're doing is creating an environment which fosters more hatred and fosters more problems, and you're just making it come back stronger, that you're going to have temporary solutions. And again, that's not to say that sometimes you need to approach things in an aggressive way. But the priority should always be about the environment. What is the ecosystem that has created this? Look at the fear that's continuously being spread on 24 hours news. Terror, fear, 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 fear. You compare that and you start to make parallels to lots of things in life, including cancer, and you see that this kind of approach doesn't work, right? It's not an approach that works. It's diplomacy. It's about looking at the environment. It's about making the environment unfavorable for these negative things in society or in your health to flourish. And I would say that prevention is nearly the same thing as therapy. So reduce your stressors, pollution, UV, smoking. Strengthen your immune system, exercise, foods, fermented foods, which is a big thing. And I'm glad to see a resurgence in fermented foods. And I don't know if you're going to be speaking about fermented foods next week, but that's something that is a big thing about protecting your microbiome, which is the seat of your immune system. This is fundamental. Your digestive system and your immune system are intrinsically linked. Breathe plenty of oxygen. Inhibit angiogenesis, right, by taking herbs, by drinking tea, which is intensely anti-angiogenic, or by finding your own supplements or finding your own foods that you like that's anti-angiogenic. And you can go to angio.org and you can find lots of lists of foods that are anti-angiogenic. Eat healthy. I would suggest that you reduce your sugar and your calorific intake from sugars and toxic foods. Pay attention to stress and negative emotions. Big factor. And if you compare those to how can I say this without getting into trouble? If you compare those with methods that some people like to use in managing cancer treatments or managing their cancer, then you see very similar things, right? So I would say reduce stresses, strengthen your immune system. HBOT is one of the things that is being used a lot, hyperbaric oxygen chambers, to really maximize the amount of oxygen you're getting. So it's about taking these things and supercharging them, essentially. Inhibit angiogenesis through supplements. Feed yourself. Maybe you want to look at the ketogenic diet and look at intermittent fasting, which is a really powerful way of potentially protecting yourself if you follow the metabolic theory. Pay attention to stress and negative emotions, but then obviously you've got other things that you may want to look at inhibiting glutamine as well. You may want to look at some of the potential of some of the drugs out there like metformin, which is something that some people take, and there's been very interesting correlations that have been happening around diabetics taking metformin and their reduced incidence of cancer. There's other therapies, 3BP is this whole thing which you can read about, and that's based upon metabolic theory. And then you've got the Western medical armory of chemotherapy, radiotherapy, surgery, if that is needed. So the majority of these things are very, very cheap. And therefore, there's no funding for research. This is one of the key problems that we have in medicine in general, is if it's something that can be given for very low cost, that means that nobody can make money out of it. So who's going to invest in all the research? And this is a problem. This is why I was talking about before the broken system. Because the people who can really dictate the funding have no financial gain through these things being proven to be effective in any way. And so this is the irony of the whole thing. This is the travesty of the whole thing, is that there are these things out there which a lot of people, a lot of good science is being done on it, but there's not enough research being done on it because there's not enough funding, because it can't be patented and there's no potential profit out at the other end of the cycle. Right, so we go back to the idea of perspectives, the micro versus the macro, the Newtonian versus the quantum, and you start to look at things like targeted drugs and individual cell behavior, the idea of cure, the idea of destroy versus manage, diplomacy, collective benefits. I know I'm stretching this analogy a little bit, but I think that it's worth sometimes just taking a look at, again, the kind of maybe the reasons why we are in the position we are, and maybe it is based upon our belief systems, and maybe it is based upon the idea that truth can be found in the microscopic, and that you don't look at, you know, that general is general, and we want to dive deep into the details, and that this is useful but not the only approach, and that we should look at all of these approaches, which brings me to Chinese medicine. And I will try to keep this relatively brief because I realize we're moving on time. So Chinese medicine has recognized the existence of cancer for well over 3,000 years and described various cancers for well over 2,000 years. It has developed different therapeutic methods for cancer management. Herbal medicine, acupuncture, the ones that most people know, but surgery, massage, exercises, dietary therapy are all part of the armory that's used in modern Chinese medicine as well. The proposed, and this is really, really basic, and again, I apologize to the Chinese doctor in the room. This is very, very basic, but the main proposed etiology in ancient Chinese medicine is accumulation, stagnation, and stasis syndromes due to both external and internal factors. So the ancients were basically saying that they believe that cancer is caused by a stagnation, a slowing down, an accumulation that's happening in a certain part of your body that's causing this cancer to develop, and that the approach is to invigorate, the approach is to move, the approach is to relieve this stagnation or stasis. Again, quite big terms, but they're looking at it in a very macro way, right? So the traditional Chinese medical approach is lifestyle advice, qigong, breathing exercise. Interesting, right? Interesting that breathing exercises is part of your treatment. Again, they didn't know about the environment, which is stressful for cancer, and that oxygen is, one of those factors. But they were involved in it. Medicinal foods, including broths and fermented foods, removing stagnation, improving circulation of blood, again, moving oxygen around, moving things around, regulating the immune system, restoring emotional balance, treating the body with selective herbs. Now, if I told the average person on the street, this is the approach that Chinese medicine uses to manage, to support somebody with cancer, they would look at that and they would say, well, that's not going to work. But now that we've gone through the journey, I hope that you start to see that these things actually do make quite a lot of sense. And if you compare it to the list that I had in front of you before, you can start to see that there's a lot of similarities in terms of what, Chinese medicine is trying to achieve compared to a lot of the management techniques that are used or that modern science would say that there is some support for. So the traditional Chinese medicine approach may seem a little bit esoteric, may seem a little bit kind of too macro, but actually it's not that far off from kind of the latest thinking, especially the metabolic theories of cancer in general, and the environmental approach, the ecosystem approach to dealing with this disease. Herbs used by, sorry, did you want to? Okay. Herbs used by Chinese medicine. Right. So now we're getting into the depths of things. What I'm not going to do is bore you with a long list of herbs, and there is a very long list of herbs that are used for the support of cancer patients. Chinese Materia Medica contains thousands of herbs. About 500 are commonly used, but there are many more. Again, I don't use this word easily. I think that they were incredible masters of observation and rigorous testing, and they were all done without labs. There was no way that they could break down with chromatography, find the different elements in these herbs. They just had to test, right? And they came up with these herbs without laboratories or RCTs. There are dozens of herbs commonly used for cancer patients with hundreds of or thousands of years of safe use. They are almost always used in combination. This is one of the key things. So you're going to see just picked out a few little studies demonstrating the potential anti-cancer effects of Chinese herbs. But in the majority of them, they're taken in isolation. They're extracted, isolated the Western way. Let's standardize, let's create an extraction. And the Chinese medical doctor would say, you are taking away so much of the potential benefit by not taking into account the synergistic effects of combining herbs. And the combination of herbs is part of the whole Materia Medica training in Chinese medicine, and why whenever I look at Materia Medica training, and my head starts to kind of bubble a little bit, because it's just crazy, the understanding of the ways that herbs interact according to Chinese medical theory. So is it hocus pocus, or is it scientifically sound? There's a common misconception that Chinese medicine has no basis in science. Again, I would quite happily sit and argue that case with anybody who wants to claim that. In fact, there have been quite a lot of studies being done in Chinese medicine, and they demonstrate the remarkable insight of these ancient masters. And I'm talking a lot about ancient, but Chinese medicine continues to develop. So I don't want you to think that it's stuck in the past and it's fixed. It's continually being developed. It's continually being researched. So I never like to use the word traditional Chinese medicine. It's always Chinese medicine, because Chinese medicine is still relevant, modern, and is still developing. So let's look at a couple of them, or a few of them. Lingzi, Ganoderma lucidum, reishi. Contains a powerful immune regulator called beta-glucan, enhances the endocrine system. Interesting. We're talking about hormones, we're talking about potential metabolic syndromes. Has been shown to prevent tumors, has been shown to inhibit DNA synthesis in cancer cells, has been shown to destroy terminal enzyme activities in tumor cells. Now, before you start to say, where's the studies? Honestly, please go to scholarly reports on Google. Right? Type in Ganoderma lucidum cancer, and you will be met with so many trials. You can read them all. So I'm just picking out things here, right? I'm not going to put references to all of them. Please do go and do some research. I'm just pulling out some things that I've picked out. Helps to promote and regulate your immune system, lymphocytes, reducing the toxic and side effects and mitigate pains during chemotherapy. And a lot of cancer patients that come to us, that's our job, is to try to make the Western medical treatment, the conventional medical treatment, more effective, and to try to manage the side effects of those treatments. And lots of these herbs that I'm going to be showing you today are used in that protocol. Enhances liver detoxification, which is essential when you're receiving chemotherapy, and helps to increase the appetite and relieve pain in late-stage cancer. So in terms of cancer management, it's very useful herb, but it's also got very powerful anti-cancer properties. Cordyceps, one of the most expensive herbs on the planet because it's so very difficult to harvest. Again, an ancient Chinese herb used for centuries. And now that they're investigating it, they're discovering some remarkable things in it. So immune stimulating, you're going to see a lot of commonality between these. Immune stimulating, so really the key things is anti-angiogenesis, immune stimulation, and whether or not it has an effect on cell proliferation, cancer growth, whether or not it encourages cell death, cancer cell death, etc. Those are the key things that you'll see. Protects the liver from toxic side effects of chemotherapy, potentiates and enhances the activity, again, so improving the effectiveness potentially of chemotherapy drugs, inducing apoptosis or normal cell death in cancer cells. So some of this has been done in vivo, some of this has been done in vitro. Anti-inflammatory properties, has been shown to inhibit metastasis and the spread of some cancers, and is an anti-angiogenic herb. And this is just one clinical trial, one research paper that was done. Conclusions highlighted, revealed that cordycepin, they always like to isolate the molecule in cordyceps. Again, that's kind of alien to the whole approach because it's all about the whole plant. So if they're finding effect in one particular isolate, then I would suggest to you that demonstrates that that's the minimum effect that you're going to get compared to combining it or taking it in whole and then combining it with other herbs. Revealed that cordycepin exhibited an anti-cancer action. Cordycepin also showed an anti-metastatic action through the inhibition of platelet aggregation, reduction of the invasiveness of cancer cells. Cordycepin, an active component of this must be the name that they give that, is expected to be a candidate anti-cancer and anti-metastatic agent. So that's just one, but again, go and do some research. Lots of information out there. Jiaogulan, we sell it as amachizuru. It's known as the grass of immortality in China. It's the tea that if you're ever a patient for us, you always get free of charge whenever you come and have treatment here. We always give everyone an amachizuru, also known as Jiaogulan, also known as Gymnostemma pentaphyllum, a very powerful immune adaptogen. So this is an adaptogen. It reacts to your body. It's studies have shown, again, after the fact, after these Chinese medical doctors have been saying, we find that this is a really helpful herb, people should drink it for their immune system. They've then gone and researched it, and they found that it is in fact a very powerful immune regulator. And it's an adaptogen which helps the body to maintain optimal homeostasis. So we're bringing back balance, the idea of balance here. Purported adaptogenic effects, including regulating blood pressure, the immune system, improving stamina and endurance. Again, this is just one kind of metadata study that was done where they investigated lots of different reports, and they said, in summary, again, making it Gymnostemma pentaphyllum something or other, has been investigated extensively as a potent anti-cancer agent against many types of cancers, both in vitro and in vivo. The general consensus from the literature is that GPM exerts its anti-cancer activities through multiple mechanisms, including cell cycle arrest, the induction of apoptosis, inhibition of invasion and metastasis, glycolysis inhibition, which is affecting the ability for this cancer cell to produce energy, and immunomodulation, modulating your immune system. So again, black and white here, yep.
Just wanted to say, because I'm a herbalist, this is what metformin was made from originally.
Really?
Yeah. They
Fascinating.
isolated chemicals in this plant, then made metformin.
I didn't know
years
that.
ago.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Wow, thank you. Huangqi astragalus, another classic Chinese herb, used throughout Chinese history and is involved in so many different Chinese formulations. Again, please do research, but again, there's this focus on cancer management with Chinese herbs throughout history. In Chinese herbs, it's been about regulating that immune system, really boosting your immune system up, and all the other things we were talking about. An intense immune regulator helps. There's some thought that it actually helps to expose rogue cells, potentially cancer cells, to the immune system. In other words, it highlights them. It says, "Look here." So there's some studies that have been done to show that. There's been studies that have been done on cancer patients taking astragalus, where they've seen quite remarkable results in terms of survival rates, a decline in mortality rates, and an increase in lifespan. So, again, no promises, no magic bullets, but there's interesting effects that are being studied, are being shown through research of these very old Chinese herbs. Yin Yang Huo, often used as an aphrodisiac in Chinese medicine, also known as horny goatweed, and is one of those herbs which is, again, used a lot. But it's again a demonstration that in Chinese herbal materia medica, it's not about one thing is for one thing, right? It's about, and even in pharmaceuticals, how much prescriptions of pharmaceuticals are based upon off-label, effects, right? They discover that it may be for one thing, but then they see it can be helpful for others. And so this is one of the studies that have been done. And so they've isolated icarin as one of the components of epimedium, and they say tremendous potential for treatment of many different cancers. The tantalizing, I'm allowed to say treatment if it's written, right? I hope. So this is a report that was done. The tantalizing promise of these compounds, as suggested by the current work, is the ability of these substances to overcome the limitations of current anti-cancer therapy, including the ability to effectively kill cancer stem cells and help overcome hormone therapy resistance. All in all, icarin and its derivatives have tremendous potential as candidates for research in the development of new anti-cancer agents. So that's another one. Dan Shen is another one. Again, I've just pulled off one of the scholarly reports here, which seems to suggest that it has some ability to inhibit proliferation of breast cancer cells. Aldenlandia is another one here. And again, you can see some of the reports. But I really recommend that you do some research into these herbs yourself, because that's probably the best way for you to get a good overview of the data out there. Other commonly used ones, I didn't have time to go through them all, but you can see, you can research those ones as well. So these are very commonly used herbs in the support of cancer patients, especially ones undergoing conventional therapies, in order to support them through their process, and they all have some evidence. Again, you can look at them. I know there's a lot of buzz around frankincense, and that is something that has been used in Chinese medicine, and there used to be a lot of research or buzz around peach kernels as well. Again, take a look at it and do your own research. So what about the supporting role of integrative medicine in cancer treatments? Well, damage caused by radiotherapy and chemotherapy in Chinese medicine these are the elements that are affected: qi, blood, essence, and fluid, the function of the organs. These are some of the side effects that we have to try to manage. Common symptoms include these, and this is very common in our clinic, and we support patients through their process, and we've helped many people to go through their conventional treatments with much lower side effects and improved outlook on their treatment approach. We would use Chinese herbal medicine and acupuncture to reduce toxic side effects, try to improve the clinical efficacy of the radiotherapy, chemotherapy, or whatever conventional treatment is being done, or preparing people for surgery by really boosting their immune system. That's another thing that we do quite often at the clinic. So boosting your immune system, improving circulation, increasing energy and appetite is another big thing that is part of our protocols here. There's the CMR, which I told you about before. If you want to read more about some of the other research that's being done, especially related to acupuncture, because I haven't had a chance to really talk about acupuncture, but if you want to find out about how acupuncture can help in a supportive role as well, then please do check that out too. Finally, tea, my obsession, which is normally another 3-hour conversation, but we're going to do it quite quickly. Tea has some very clear proven properties. One is it's an anti-angiogenic, so you now understand what that means. So it's going to inhibit any excessive angiogenic factor, which may help when you're talking about things like cancer. It's rich in polyphenols, especially EGCG. You always hear about antioxidants in tea, right? You've heard it a million times. Actually, the antioxidant theory is much more complicated than most people think. It's a very nice way to say you need your antioxidants, but it's a lot more complicated than that. And there's significant evidence to say that actually when you drink tea, the level of actual absorbed antioxidants in your bloodstream is actually not very high. And there's a lot of, and this is just in general with a lot of foods, but tea has been researched a lot. So there's a lot of papers about EGCG and polyphenols and antioxidant benefits of tea, and the benefits of tea, which are definitely there in meta-studies. So you can see meta-studies where tea has had intense health protective effects, and it's always been associated with the antioxidant function, or the antioxidant as the reason for that. However, science is moving a little bit more into saying, well, maybe it's actually something else that's specific around EGCG and the polyphenols on tea, because it doesn't seem to make sense, because the actual level of antioxidants that are in your bloodstream, after drinking tea are not high enough. And yet tea has been proven to have very health protective effects. And there's still a lot of excitement around EGCG, and there's a lot of cancer research being done around EGCG where they've demonstrated some mechanisms and effects, but it might not be as simple as just the antioxidant concept. Also, almost exclusively available in tea is L-theanine, and this is one of the real things in tea that you can't get anywhere else, and it crosses, well, a couple of plants, but almost exclusively in tea. And this is an amino acid which crosses the blood-brain barrier, affects your dopamine levels, affects your GABA levels, affects your alpha brainwave activity, which is why monks have always used tea, because it helps them to meditate and helps creative thought. And this has been demonstrated very, very clearly in MRI scans that it really lights up alpha brainwave activity. And it's thought to have a very powerful effect on lots of different aspects in your body, but the immune system being one of them. So, those are some of the general properties of tea. What about some of the studies that have been done with tea? You can see just a little background of some of the papers that I've been reading. So here are some takeaway points. Again, you can do your own research. There's a book called Tea and Health, I think. It's a very simple title. It's a book about that thick, just full of research papers about tea by somebody, Preeny, I think, is the surname of the author, a person who collected all of these studies. Here are some takeaways. EGCG and other polyphenols have been shown to inhibit tumor cells proliferation and have a strong anti-cancer effect. Theanine has been shown to suppress cancer growth and enhance the effects of chemotherapy. Polyphenols have been shown to induce cancer cell apoptosis. Tea has been shown to modulate the immune system. Tea activates detoxification enzymes, so the detox process, the concept of flushing your body and trying to create an environment which is not suitable for cancer cell proliferation is also being investigated. Theaflavins, which exist mostly in black teas or darker teas, catechins, which exist mostly in green teas, are pro-oxidant and cytotoxic to cancer cells, but not to normal cells. So I said that this concept of this antioxidant thing is a bit more complicated. So in fact, there is some research which is showing that it actually may do the opposite for cancer cells, put them in a state of weakness, of instability. There's evidence that tea may reduce the risk of prostate, breast, and colorectal cancer. It definitely interferes with angiogenesis through multiple pathways, protects against the carcinogenic effects of nitrosamines, and metadata studies have shown that regular consumption of green tea may reduce risk of ovarian cancer by 40%, interestingly compared with a 20 to 30% increased risk with regular coffee consumption. So coffee and tea are two different drinks. They both contain caffeine, but they have very different potential effects. That's not to say coffee is dangerous. I don't want you to take that, but that was part of the same study. And finally, so as a conclusion, Chinese medicine is based on millennia of experimentation. The herbs used have some evidence of anti-cancer effects across many mechanisms. Chinese medicine can work effectively alongside conventional therapies to enhance effectiveness and reduce side effects. Natural treatments like Chinese medicine needs to be recognized and used rather than being sidelined. And this is not just Chinese medicine. There's lots of therapies that you could throw this into. But this idea of sidelining anything that doesn't fit in with the prevailing medical model, I think, is not helpful. We need fresh paradigms. We need the breaking down of unhelpful dogmas. We need to bridge all medicines, black cat, white cat, ginger cat. We need to try to bridge those gaps and create a dialogue between them. And I think that organizations like Yes to Life are fundamental at helping to promote this idea. We need to allow for multiple perspectives to coexist and inform each other. I think this is one of the key things which I see time and time again, that people are fixated and locked into a certain perspective on the way things should be, and they don't allow for this coexist, for multiple perspectives to coexist. I really think we need a radical rethinking of our system, of our systems, and we need a truthful and enthusiastic approach to food and herbs as medicine. Otherwise, we're never going to really get anywhere. Even if we make advances, this is always going to be a big stumbling block for progress. And that is it. Thank you. Sorry, I know it's